There are a lot of big legal stories going on with the former president, with rapper mogul P. Diddy, with the federal government releasing sealed indictment papers against Donald Trump. To help me go through all this, I have Katie Cherkasky with me. Katie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let me give just a little background on you for my audience. Katie is a former federal prosecutor, a current criminal defense and civil rights attorney, a legal analyst that's been on many different news networks, former Air Force, and mother. I'm just reading today that looks like Decision Desk HQ and The Hill have just released a big story. Donald Trump is now leading Kamala Harris by 10 points on the probability of winning. You know, just 90 days ago, she was 10 points up and above Donald Trump. What do you think has been the shift in momentum change? Has it been these legal cases falling apart for Donald Trump? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the legal cases and the lawfare that President Trump has faced have turned a lot of people off against the Democratic Party. In terms of the loss of Kamala Harris's lead, I think primarily it's because she has proven herself to be who most people already knew who she was, and she has not risen to the occasion, as it were, like the initial part of her campaign was kind of hoping. So in terms of hearing more interviews from her, even though they've been very limited, they have not delivered on any sort of substance that I think a lot of the American people really want to hear. And certainly, I think that the irony of Kamala Harris and her campaign claiming that Donald Trump will weaponize the justice system when they can see that that's exactly what the current administration has done is not lost on a lot of Americans. And they're really, frankly, probably tired of it.
Yeah. As someone who does criminal defense law as yourself, I'm sure there's many times you tell your client, just be quiet, don't talk, don't incriminate yourself. It's almost like the more podcasts and interviews Kamala does, the less people like her. Would you agree with that?
Well, I would absolutely agree. And it's unfortunate that in a criminal context, there's really no comparison to a campaign context, but maybe that would have been good advice for her to take anyway, even though she's not a criminal defendant, because typically when you don't talk, the better people have a view of you in certain conditions. So in this case, I absolutely think that could be a huge factor here. There's just been very little substance. And in fact, her very far left and progressive policies are coming to the forefront. And a lot of people are not a fan of that because they see where things stand. She's failed to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. She's been asked multiple times what makes her different from the current administration, and she's given no substantive answer on that. And that's very concerning, I'm sure, to a lot of the electorate.
Yeah, I agree. You know, you've written a book, Woke Warrior. I want to talk about that later in the interview because I believe she and Joe Biden have made our military woke. They've encouraged it in schools, among corporations. But I thought this was really interesting. So Donald Trump goes to New York, to the Al Smith Catholic dinner in New York, kind of a tradition for people running for president. They raise money for children. Behind Donald Trump, and mostly off camera, but every now and then she came into view, was New York Attorney General Leticia James, who has just absolutely tried to make Donald Trump's life a living hell, ruin his life, his family, his businesses. Every now and then, though, she was caught on camera applauding Donald Trump and laughing at his jokes. Don't you think it was odd that the person pursuing Mayor Eric Adams and Donald Trump and others in the room was allowed to attend that dinner?
It's very odd that she was there, but it takes a lot of gall for Donald Trump to show up in the same room as her. I think it just shows exactly the extent of what we would consider lawfare on her behalf. The cases that she brought against Donald Trump were incredibly novel and incredibly politically based. I mean, she campaigned on getting Trump. She pursued him aggressively in a way that under the law has really never been seen before. And in terms of his civil case in New York with the huge dollar figures, it looks very likely that the appellate courts might overturn that in its entirety, or at least to a great deal. So in her perspective of the legality of what he engaged in, I think she even knows that it was highly politically based. So certainly took a lot of courage for him to show up in the same room as somebody that has essentially tried to destroy him and his business empire.
Yeah. He seems to do that a lot, though. He shows up places where no one would assume he would go. He goes after his enemies. He's also very charming, working at a McDonald's just in the last, day or so. One thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on is the RNC is suing the state of Michigan for having 486,000 extra ballots across 53 counties. So basically, they've put out almost 500,000 more ballots than legal voting citizens. And Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson there in Michigan said, listen, we're aware of the problem. This isn't as bad as it looks. We'll remedy it after the election. How come they're always wanting to remedy dead people on the voter rolls, additional ballots going out, adding extra people to the ballot rolls last minute? Why do they always want to correct that after the elections are over?
Well, this is part of the bigger overarching issue about the faith that the American people can have in the election system. Every state has all of these intricate and different processes, and the fairness of those processes is really a huge question. So to the extent that the Michigan officials are suggesting that it's too close to the election to handle this now, the reality is that after the election, it's going to be such an inopportune time to deal with these things instead of upfront, and it's going to cause more questions about whether this truly was a fair election, unless of course there's a significantly huge margin for one of the candidates. But unfortunately, if the polls are anything close to accurate, it looks like it could be very tight, and this will again lead to, I'm sure, post-election challenges that will have to be adjudicated through the courts. So certainly it's unfortunate that they wouldn't want to remedy this upfront, and it plays into a lot of Americans' fears that the process is not fair and that they can't trust the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, the last election was decided by less than 80,000 votes. So to now have a number like 486,000 suddenly injected, like you say, it just calls into question doubts of a free and fair election. I wanted to get your thoughts on Elon Musk. Just in the last 48 hours, the Democrats are calling for him to be investigated for giving away $1 million for people that were coming together at a patriotic event. He asked them to sign a petition defending the U.S. Constitution. He's specifically worried about freedom of speech and the Second Amendment. I don't see that he's done anything wrong. He certainly doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. Why has he become such a target of the left?
Well, he's very powerful. He has a huge following. And of course, he's made it very clear that he supports President Trump for the next president. In terms of the legality of this giveaway, there is a federal law that essentially prohibits paying folks to register to vote or to vote a certain way. But this giveaway is limited to folks who are already registered. So it kind of skirts around that particular technicality. And also, there's not any sort of requirement that you have to commit to casting a vote a certain way. And many of these people may have already decided they're going to support President Trump, but they're not obligated to do so. So I think in terms of potential indictment, that would be a reach, especially considering the Supreme Court's recent analysis of election laws and kind of narrowing the scope of a lot of that. So from a legal perspective, I don't think it's a strong case against him, but I'm sure it's incredibly frustrating to those on the other side politically, because it's hugely influential and perhaps could make a difference because, as we've talked about, it's such a potentially close election, especially in those swing states. So anybody that may change their mind as a result of potentially winning this large amount of money, that might be concerning to them, but I don't find it to be an illegal act of any sort.
Yeah. It's interesting because last election cycle, they convinced Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook to part ways with $400 million in order to make elections fair and free. We now know those Zuckerbucks ended up going mostly to swing states where 90% of that was spent on propping up Joe Biden. But nobody seemed to throw a fit about him injecting $400 million. But Elon Musk gives away $1 million defending freedom of speech. And what do? They come after him for his freedom of speech and how he chooses to spend his own money. I just find it, I guess, hypocritical that they, support Mark Cuban, the billionaire, or Mark Zuckerberg, the billionaire. But as soon as Elon Musk, who has supported Donald Trump and freedom of speech and is fighting for Twitter to exist in Europe and other parts of the world, suddenly he needs to be investigated when those other billionaires don't.
Well, that's exactly right. And obviously the dichotomy is very apparent to, I think, a lot of people, that the law is not being applied evenly if you're going to suggest investigating one owner of a social media platform and totally disregarding the huge impact that Zuckerberg had on the other election, not to mention all of the information that was suppressed at the behest of the federal government through those social media platforms without any action being taken whatsoever. So the irony is obviously there, and it's very political. In terms of any sort of criminality, I mean, prosecutors have prosecutorial discretion. I guess they could try to come up with some creative charging scheme, just like they did against President Trump in many of these cases, but it would be a long shot. And certainly there are directly comparable cases on the other side that would show it was a selective prosecution.
Yeah, I agree. Selective is exactly the right word. You and your husband, Andrew, have been putting your reputation and your neck on the line, educating people on how the left is manipulating and destroying America. Can you just share with my audience some of the ways that you believe the left is influencing America down the wrong path?
Well, a big part of our focus, we work with the federal government a lot. We do military defense work as a big part of our practice. We are both veterans. The reality is that the Biden administration from day one has instilled these DEI policies that were required by all federal agencies to abide by. And that has totally undercut basically every single federal agency across the board. I'm particularly familiar with the military and the way that that focus has essentially overridden anything related to operational readiness, anything related to meritocracy. And that's a huge concern, obviously, as an American, but really now with the state of the world as it is and the wars that are going on and the real risk that the United States could be actually pulled into participating in that in even greater sense than we are at this point. I think people need to realize that these focuses are coming directly from the top and from the administration, and that they are fully to blame for the manner in which these agencies are being handled.
Okay. Put your legal hat to the side, put your former military, or I guess you're still former military, on for a minute. Kamala Harris has almost no foreign policy experience. She has not interacted with the major foreign leaders around the world, especially not the ones that are in conflict right now. How much confidence do you have if she were to become basically the commander-in-chief of the U.S. military to keep the United States safe and our allies safe? Have you given much thought to that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've given a lot of thoughts to that. I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding. We see what's happened under the Biden administration. Kamala Harris has affirmatively refused to distance herself from any of those decisions. The withdrawal from Afghanistan, she says that she was part of that decision. And that was probably one of the most embarrassing moments in American military history, at least in the recent past here. And so certainly I don't think she has any true understanding of the Department of Defense and the distractions and the essentially neglect towards mission readiness that all of these policies have instilled into the Department of Defense, that's taken away from really the United States being prepared to move ahead to a war if that's what becomes necessary. So personally, I think that she stands by Joe Biden's policy. She's been given many opportunities to distance herself, and I don't think she has any sort of idea what kind of problem this has created from a really deep level.
Yeah. God help us all if she becomes commander-in-chief. It scares, that's one of the things that scares me the most, is the illegal immigrant situation is actually going to ramp up, and she's going to drag us into World War III. As a lawyer, do you find it odd that the Department of Justice still won't release the transcript and the audio tapes of President Joe Biden being deposed for illegally taking top secret documents when he was interviewed by special counsel Robert Hur?
I find it very troubling because there's many other examples of the department releasing information from pending cases. And again, it's fully at their discretion. But in that particular case, what we do know from her report is that Joe Biden affirmatively committed the offense of wrongful retention of classified documents. There's absolutely no question that the elements of that offense were met. And they just chose not to pursue a prosecution because essentially they said that he wouldn't be able to be mentally fit to face that, which is an odd analysis because that's not typically what a prosecutor would use as a justification to not pursue charges. Again, of course, as the sitting president, there's a lot of complications in terms of the timing, but there's no question that the evidence itself established that he violated the law. And so certainly the tapes, I think the American people should be privy to that, especially after the Biden administration attacked Robert Hur for his characterization of what had gone on during those interviews, even though at the end of the day, Hur really threw Biden a bone by declining to prosecute when he very well could have. He had everything he needed to establish those offenses. So again, it's up to them and their discretion, and there's not a lot that can be done to force that decision unless the Supreme Court essentially ordered the release of that information. But it's very telling in terms of why are they hiding this and what exactly are they hiding, especially after they accused her of essentially mischaracterizing what had gone on in those interviews. I think at this point, we can assume that they've conceded that whatever he wrote in his report is all pretty accurate.
Yeah. I just found it interesting that, as a senator and a vice president, he stole those documents in order to fulfill a $10 million book contract. But then when a former sitting president, who under the Presidential Records Act takes those, suddenly he's questioned and his motives are questioned. At this point, we all now know that Joe Biden is an old man with a weak memory. It's the reason they did a coup against him to remove him out of office and try to supplant him with Kamala Harris. Hopefully that won't take place. But I was reading just this morning that, again, they're denying FOIA requests and the release of those transcripts. Speaking of the release of information, the January 6th Capitol breach lawsuit against former President Donald Trump wasn't making headway. So Jack Smith decides, after being thrown off of the Florida Mar-a-Lago documents case, that he and Judge Tanya Chutkan are going to release sealed documents to the media to try to influence the election, embarrass Donald Trump, get this case moving again. Do you see this as misconduct that a lawyer and a judge would collude to release sealed documents on a case that just isn't going their way?
Oh, I see it as election interference without any question. That case is essentially dead in the water pending the election. And if Donald Trump wins, obviously it will go away entirely. If he doesn't win, it could proceed. But at this point, that's many, many months out. So the idea that Jack Smith, first of all, proceeded with this kind of superseding indictment after the Supreme Court ruled on the immunity case and essentially questioned whether this case could even move forward in its current form and what evidence could be used. That was out of the ordinary and really unwarranted, given the fact that this case can't logically proceed for many months, if not forever. And then secondarily, the judge allowed Jack Smith to file this motion regarding his new indictment out of order. Essentially, the defense would be the one to initially file such a motion, but he insisted on kind of flipping things so that he would be able to file that, get that information out to the public without really any legitimate legal purpose. There's nothing that's going to happen with the case. The case, like I said, can't go anywhere further at this point because of the analysis that has to be done on the immunity decision. And if Judge Chutkan rules against Donald Trump and says that the case can proceed, that order is immediately appealable anyway, all the way up through the Supreme Court. So suffice to say, there's a lot more litigation, pretrial litigation, that would have to happen for the case to ever go forward. So back to your original question, why are they releasing this information now? There's really no other purpose other than to bring this to the forefront of the American people right before an election, totally disregarding the DOJ's self-imposed rule that they're not supposed to take prosecutorial action within 60 days of an election. That's not an enforceable rule or law, but that's a policy that's gone totally by the wayside. So there's no justification whatsoever. It's incredibly upsetting given the status of that case currently.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate you weighing in on that. What do you see coming out of this massive indictment and lawsuit against rapper and music mogul Sean P. Diddy Combs? It seems that he has sexual blackmail on just about everybody, and most of them within the Democrat Party, just like Jeffrey Epstein, who may or may not have killed himself when cameras went off. Where do you see this P. Diddy case going?
Well, it's a massive case, and there's also some civil cases that have come out along the way as well. In terms of the actual federal criminal case, I think that the federal prosecutors probably have substantial evidence against him. They wouldn't move forward, in my opinion, if they did not believe that they had evidence, probably beyond a reasonable doubt, that he committed these offenses. They are going to have to prove each of these instances specifically. And there are many people who we have to wonder if some people are jumping on a bandwagon for maybe a money grab at this point, that you have to kind of differentiate from the legitimate cases that exist. But again, with racketeering cases, one of the benefits to the prosecutors is that they can typically get people to flip on their main defendant if they threaten those folks with being indicted for racketeering themselves as part of the greater enterprise, or call themselves a victim, and then they can testify against the big guy. So I think that's probably a big part of what they're trying to do now as this case is proceeding. But I think he's in a lot of trouble. He very well may spend the rest of his life behind bars if they can prove up what they've alleged. And I think that they probably have some strong evidence against him.
Yeah, that would be my guess as well. Hopefully he doesn't Jeffrey Epstein himself while in jail.
Well, he already had that chance and he didn't. So I think he's fighting at this point. And, there's defenses to be had, but doesn't mean that you're going to win ultimately. So more to follow, but he's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, he really is. Okay, I don't know if this is in your book, Woke Warriors, but during the Bret Baier Fox News Kamala Harris interview, he pointed out that she facilitated and supported taxpayer money going to sex change operations for prisoners in California. That same thing is happening within our military. What do you know about that? Do you cover that in your book, Woke Warriors?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We talk about transgender care in the military and how the Biden administration flipped the Trump administration's policy to allow for transgender individuals to serve and also to potentially have their medical care covered. The DoD has paid for essentially sex change operations for military members who have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. There's a fight right now as to whether they will pay for the dependents of military members who are diagnosed for gender affirming care, as it were. So that's absolutely horrific that our federal government and taxpayer dollars are going to this type of medical care. And so we talk about that in the book. There's a whole chapter on transgenderism in the military and whether that's compatible with military service and why it might be something that the American taxpayers are paying a lot of money for people who are essentially non-deployable, non-operational while they're undergoing significant medical treatment.
Okay. So you and your husband, you're both former federal prosecutors. You're both former military. What else is in the book? What else is my audience going to learn by reading it?
Well, the book, I think, talks a lot about the history of why the military became woke. And we talk about how the Obama administration is really where things started and how the Biden administration came in and flipped a lot of the Trump era policies that brought it back into the realm of identity politics. Essentially, the military is obsessed with identity politics. It reigns supreme over basically every other concern that they have. And it's something that is totally inverted in terms of, you think of the military as being like a meritocracy in a very pure sense, that you work hard and you get promoted and you get good jobs because of your work performance. But now they want to infiltrate that with, quotas. They want to insist on having certain amounts of women in certain units, even though there's studies that show that the effectiveness of these units is far less. But, you know, in order to appease the woke powers that be, this is the priority of the DOD. And it's been weaponized by so many people. There's so many ways for people to take advantage of the system, claim to be victims of sexual assault, claim to be victims of harassment or racism, and it inverts the chain of command, essentially. So there's a big question about whether these policies are supposedly making our military stronger, which is what the DEI powers that be have claimed. And the proof shows very much to the opposite. So that's what the book covers. It has a lot of different chapters in terms of the ideas of gender, transgenderism, climate change, all these different programs that the DOD under the Biden administration has funded to great taxpayer expense, and questions whether that actually makes us stronger and fulfills the military's purpose, which is to defend our nation and win its wars. That's pretty simple.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put a direct link to Woke Warriors down below so that people can go check that out. I want to thank you for your military service, you and your husband, and for all that you guys do for the country, and for taking time out of your day to come on. If people want to follow you online or learn more about you, what you do, where can I point them?
Yeah, you can find me on X at Cherkasky Katie, and I will be on Instagram at Katie Cherkasky.
Okay, I'll put those direct links and especially to the book. Katie, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.